Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about solving quadratics using square roots and complex numbers. The last couple of days, we have spent talking about complex numbers and we've learned how to add, subtract, and multiply them. We've already solved quadratics using square roots. Today, we are just going to put them together. Before we start solving new equations, let's review how to solve using square roots. First step, anytime you want to solve using square roots, you have to isolate the quadratic term first. You do this by using add and subtract or multiply and divide. After you isolate the quadratic term, the x squared, if you will, is all by itself. You need to make sure you square root both sides. When you square root both sides, you can't forget to have the plus and minus because we're solving. You need a positive answer and a negative answer. Then you just make sure you solve for x and you tell us what x squared equals. Let's do a few examples now just to remember how and for practice. Make sure you copy these examples down into your notes. Let's start with x squared plus 2 equals 18. Step 1, first thing we have to do is isolate the quadratic term. Isolate the x squared, get it all by itself. To do that, we will subtract 2 from both sides first. That gives us x squared equals 16. Now, over here on the left side, the quadratic, the x squared is all by itself. We can square root both sides. A square and a square root will cancel to give us x equals plus minus the square root of 16, 4. X equals plus and minus 4. Next example, a little bit tougher. 3x squared plus 1 equals 60. Step 1, let's isolate the quadratic term. Isolate the x squared. The first thing we have to deal with is the plus 1. Subtract it on both sides. 3x squared equals 60. Next, to finish isolating the x squared, we have to divide both sides by 3. X squared equals 20. Now that the quadratic term is isolated, it's all by itself, we can square root both sides. We get x equals plus and minus the square root of 20. But, as always, we need to simplify the square root of 20. We need to think to ourselves and remember that 20 is 4 times 5, 2 times 10, 1 and 20. We like 4 times 5 the best because we know the square root of 4. Square root of 4 is 2. I don't know what the square root of 5 is, so I write it down. Square root of 5, x equals plus minus 2 root 5. All done. Next review example, x plus 3 quantity squared equals 7. If you notice on this one looks a little bit different. It looks a little bit different because the quadratic term, the x squared, is already isolated. The parentheses are around everything. It means right now we can square root. Square root both sides right now. Square and the square root cancel over here on the left. 2x plus 3 equals plus and minus the square root of 7. I don't know anything else about the square root of 7, so I'm going to leave it alone. Now it's time to solve for x. Subtract 3 on both sides. 2x equals negative 3 plus and minus root 7. Divide to solve for x and finish the problem. X is going to equal negative 3 plus and minus the square root of 7 over 2. last three problems have all been problems we should already know how to do. Now we're going to step in using square roots, but now we're going to see some complex numbers along the way. We're still going to use the same steps. Isolate the quadratic term. Square root both sides. Don't forget the plus and minus. Solve for x. The only difference is we're going to see some negative square roots. We're going to have to work with imaginary numbers. Let's try a couple examples. Again, make sure you're getting all these examples written down in your notes. Start off very, very basic. X squared equals negative 16. Since the quadratic term, the x squared, is already all by itself, there's nothing else to it, we can start working right away. Step 1, square root both sides of the equation. The left side is really easy, x equals. Since I'm solving, I know I'm going to need a plus and minus, but we're going to have to work on negative 16. Let's remember, negative 16 is really just negative 1 times 16. We should know, that the square root of negative 1 is equal to I. We pull out our pull out the imaginary term right now. The square root of 16, everyone should know that's 4, plus or minus, and we're all done. X equals plus and minus 4i. Easy example to start. Next example we want to look at, a little bit more complicated. X squared plus 3 equals negative 7. First, we have to isolate the variable, get x squared all by itself. We will do that by subtracting 3 on both sides. X squared equals negative 10. Now that the x squared is all by itself, we can square root both sides right now. X equals plus minus. Negative 10 is really just negative 1 times the square root of positive 10. We should know that the square root of negative 1 again is just I. Square root of 10 doesn't simplify at all, so I'm just going to leave it square root of 10. X equals plus and minus I square root 10. One more example on this video right here for you. 4x squared equals negative 32. Again, first thing we have to do is isolate the variable by dividing by 4 on both sides. X squared equals negative 8. Try again, negative 8. Now that the x squared is isolated, it's all by itself, we can square root both sides. X is going to equal plus and minus. Negative 8 is going to break down again. Negative 1 times positive 8. We know what the square root of negative 1 is. That's I. If we look at 8, the square root of 8 right here, we hopefully can see pretty easily that 8 is 4 times 2. We know the square root of 4 is 2. However, I don't know the square root of 2, so I'll leave that alone. Now that I've simplified the 8, I have to put everything together. I have to take the plus minus, the x equals, the plus minus, the I, the 2, the square root of 2, and we have to put that all together into an answer. So let's write it down. X equals plus minus. We want to put the real number 2 first, then the I, then the square root term we want to write last. That's just the way we like it to look when we write our answer down. all done. Hopefully you got these all in the notes. This video is also posted up to Google Classroom, so you can go back and watch it again later on if you need. Please read the board. There's Math Lab tomorrow. Get yourself there, take care of business. The rest of the schedule is written up on the board now. Please check it out. If you need to go to Math Lab to get your grade better, get yourself to Math Lab and get your grade better. Get your homework done. I will see you tomorrow, kids.